right, everything just worked out.
One of my favorites was a C64 called Fort Apocalypse. Did you ever play that one?
No, I don't remember that. We'll have to ask
thing.
what the favorite C64 games are out there.
Oh yeah, we should totally do that. I have a few
Jumpman.
favorite. Yep.
Jumpman was big, but I wasn't a big Jumpman fan. But I played Kennedy Approach. Yeah, very good. So I played Kennedy Approach because there was so much stress. Like you'd get these radio calls as they're going down in the mountains over Colorado. They'd be like, "We're going down," and in your mind you can hear the screams of the people as they plunge to their death. And after that, I'd be like, "Oh, cool! I'm ready to work at Commodore again. Something less stressful than playing Kennedy Approach." So I used it as a super pressurization therapy. So we're in living color, somebody said.
So yeah. Hi everyone, happy Friday. It's good to see
everyone.
you all online. Just so people, probably half the people on the YouTube chat don't know this, but my original YouTube channel was called Schematica. So if you see me chatting on YouTube with you all, I'm Schematica, just so you know. And that's the channel that I should probably try to revive because it's actually got some decent history on it. But anyway, so here we are. We're on Bill's channel live now, and Bill, you're showing some absolute.
I'm showing something old.
Yeah, old but beautiful. So you've got a camera pointed at your 1084S or whatever it is.
It's actually a Commodore 1902. This is the one that was designed for this is before the 1084S, but the 1084S is based on this. But this is the one that was made for the C128. So it's 9-pin RGB connectors, digital, not analog on this.
Nice. So it's the legit high quality, the one that we all wanted when I was a kid, but none of us could afford it. So in Australia, everything was more expensive. So we had those stupid RF modulators that would use your television as the monitor, and it worked, but it was kind of fuzzy and low res.
Yeah, I have one of those around here too, but yeah, they were real artifacty. Yeah, but yeah, I actually hated those things. And I used to watch my VCR on a monitor like this. And so I had the best looking VCR of anybody I knew, rather than watching a VCR on Channel 3.
That's half the reason we wanted them. And when the Amiga 500 came out, people were buying the 1084Ss with Amigas, and they could do really high resolution. So we would hook up an SVHS with stereo, like the most amazing home cinema experience then. It didn't matter that the screen was small. What it really was the quality of the image and the quality of the color, and you didn't care because it's like, I'm going to watch this movie on my own with headphones, with stereo sound from an S-video VHS, and really good crisp image.
Right, now I have a monitor, and I'm looking for it right now, and I don't see it. I have a monitor from the old SX64, which is the portable Commodore 64, and it's got a little monitor, a little 5-inch monitor. Gosh. They were beautiful monitors, and so I have a monitor around here somewhere. I just don't know where I put it.
I never actually knew anyone in Australia who had one of those luggable C64s.
Yeah.
I've never even seen one in actual. I've only seen pictures of them. So I'd love to.
I'll tell a Commodore story here real quick. Yeah. When we got to the CES show, we stayed at the first year I went was for the Plus 4 series, and we called it TED back then. And we stayed at the Star Dump, known as the Stardust to everybody else. But of our 5 hotel rooms, only one had a locking door. The doors had been kicked in so many times. So we took the mattresses out of all of our hotel rooms, put them in one hotel room, and we try to leave like a person awake all times, preferably a hardware engineer, right? And, it was nasty. But the one thing, standing right outside the door one morning, we heard a lion roar. And we're in Vegas, right? And you hear roar, and the hair stands up on the back of your neck because it's primal, right? And it was the Siegfried and Roy show was at the Stardom that year. So the next year we got to the MGM, and we get there and our reservations have been canceled by Atari, and which we thought was cool. We thought it was an interesting technique. And the way we got into the hotel for all of the available rooms, all except one night, was the guy traded an SX64 to the hotel manager. And I mean, we literally put it right on the counter and said, let's make this work. So we got all the available hotel rooms in Vegas at CES show the day before CES.
Crazy.
Yeah, it was a fun time. So we called and canceled the reservations for Atari. They were staying at the Stardust that year, I think. Not the executives. The executives all stayed at the Grand Hilton or someplace like that.
Of course.
I forget. Gosh, I forgot the name they used to stay.
The engineering and booth crew always need to be in the hotel, if at all possible, because you got to be able to run up to your room and grab something or fix something and bring it right back. I've been there many times. We had this crazy show I was at with my previous employer, who many of you have heard of before.
This one here?
Hey, what are you doing?
Whoops, wrong one here.
I got to compete with that.
There you go.
Anyway.
Hey, the top two companies in the field, right?
That's right. So, but we had this crazy show at an Embedded Systems conference in 2006, I want to say, and we were showing off. The big emphasis then was all our FPGA design capabilities, which I love. Right. By the way, I thought we had even to this day, I've not seen a better product for FPGA development, and it just market timing and relationships with FPGA vendors were not adequately managed, let's say.
Right.
Still would have been.
Let alone multiple vendors.
Yeah. But the problem so here was this Embedded Systems conference, and we had the biggest booth I've ever seen in the whole company history was at that show. It was huge, and all sorts of engineering staff flew over from headquarters because we were running these interactive demos with all driven by FPGA boards that were controlling, CCTV cameras on pan, tilt, zoom, and
wow, okay.
You could send SMS messages to control them and receive an image back, and all sorts of really cool stuff, right? Industrial control. Right. But a lot of the hardware had only just come off, the initial production run at an EMS company in Australia. And it all had to be flown over, and literally we had some of our engineers who were on our hardware team in their hotel rooms staying up till 3 a.m. the night before the morning of, just making sure the code for the FPGAs was running and that they could actually send the SMS and make the camera move. And it was even the morning of, we were doing finishing touches on the booth, getting it all working, but it worked. But crazy stuff sometimes at those trade shows to do a good demo. But I missed that. It was not fun at the time. But the next day afterwards, with the successful conversations you get to have and the sales leads, and you come back thinking, man, it's good to have a cold, hard deadline sometimes. It's like a university exam, like you don't get to choose the date.
CES shows, same way. You can't move them even by 10 seconds. I mean, we called and asked, can we move the CES show? And CES told us no.
You've got to have things working. And so that means like right up to the minute sometimes. When it comes to hardware, it's like, and even if this was Hackaday SuperCon, it's the same deal. Like somebody else has organized this event. They've set the date. It's all locked in. And that creates a kind of pressure to get something working that very few other things actually sort of do. And it's healthy to have some of those sometimes. I think this I have clutter around me, and it sucks, and it annoys my wife. And I think, you know, a big part of that is that I get all these ideas and I start a lot of projects, and and I don't finish them often enough, and that's because there's no real mandatory deadline for a lot of these. It's just I'm inventing something, and if I want to turn it into a product, well, that's entirely on me. So it's a little surprise, you know, in industry that CEOs and CTOs actually utilize industry events. Or at Autodesk, we have this big yearly event that's a massive industry trade show called Autodesk University. Altium has Altium Live. That's it's like 1/100th the size of that, but these kinds of events are useful. PCB West is a great one. That's a catalyst for me to finish training material so I can present it there. It's good to have these. It's good to have these deadlines that are set and then enforced somehow by other people, because it makes you. So anyway, not to wax lyrical.
Yeah, well, it actually got management when we'd get within sight of hitting the CES show. Middle managers that used to just urinate on the project, right? They would walk over, pee on it, and that was their way of contributing. And we're like, please stop urinating on it. Urine conducts electricity, you know? And they would actually stop
That's why you got to build an electric fence into everything you do, Bill.
Yeah. Or just beat the crap out of a couple middle managers and hope the rest do it. Take one up in a helicopter, throw them out, and hope the others fall in line. Yeah. But they would actually stop messing with us the month of CES, because nobody wanted to be the guy that got blamed for missing CES. But as soon as we got back, they were tripping me in the hallways and stuff. They're back to their behaviors of trying to be impedmetic, if that's a word. They would try to impede me.
That's when you buy them a signed, autographed copy of Yertle the Turtle by Dr. Seuss. And say, oh,
leave it laying around.
I'm Mac. You may think you're King Yertle, but I'm Mac, and all I have to do is burp, and your whole world comes falling down. So anyway.
We used to leave dry cleaner bags laying around and baited, and like at the end of the day, you'd find a middle manager trapped in one, almost suffocating, you know. So that was our way of keeping them out of our hair for a little bit. But there's the wire story, which we'll tell it a different day, but you've heard it several times now.
I have. It's actually a good story, man.
But it starts from a middle manager being put in charge while the big managers are away at Italy. And he said the C-128 has to drop in priority. It's just been priority way too long. And so for a week we did nothing. And then we had to do everything over 3 days' time. And that's where the bad trace came from.
Yep, because PCB designers were rushed and then told to go off and do something else, and so things didn't get
we call it the weekend of tears. Yeah, because we worked 72 hours straight through. All 3 shifts, and I just set up my sleeping bag in the CAD area because it was cold, and I just slept in there all weekend long. It was so. Yep. So, anyways,
so what are we
got
at
here.
This is a live 128. It's a thing of beauty. And the screen. So we talked about the monitor there, but looking at that monitor, I see that you're in BASIC.
Right.
But I see C1985 Commodore, but now I see under that C1977 Microsoft.
Your soft core. Yes. We are the only people ever to get over on Microsoft, and we bought the rights to BASIC for a one-time fee of like $5,000 or something. And up till then, they would only license it. And Jack Trammell is on the record as saying, I already have a wife. They wanted $1 per copy. And he's like, I'm already married. Why would I do that?
What?
Yeah. So we got our own. Now, it's a complete rewrite.
But my question is, does that mean the Commodore BASIC was a derivative of Altair BASIC?
Altair BASIC, I don't know. I could actually probably call some people and ask them.
So wait, BASIC, so my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, Bill, but BASIC is just a programming language, But Bill Gates got all litigious on people when back in 1974, 6,
when he wrote the letter?
The Altair came out and people started copying Microsoft Basic for the Altair computer, which was arguably the first personal computer, right? That people would build themselves from kits.
Right, right.
But Bill Gates and someone else, I guess him and his cohort, created the first ever BASIC for that Altair, and then people would just copy it. And then he got all angry and litigious and wrote nasty gram letters to everyone saying
the open letter, yeah. Don't steal my software, right?
And that sort of sets the whole stage for Microsoft and all of that history, right, and why people have a bad taste in their mouth often when they think about Microsoft, even though we all use their software, because it is actually,
right,
don't hate on me for saying this, but it's scientifically impossible to argue this. It is actually pretty good software. Yes,
it was a great operating system.
We have blue screens of death and everything, but I look at Windows 10 now and how good it is compared to 95, 98, and ME.
Right.
They've done some pretty good stuff, okay. But anyway, not to digress and get wrapped out around that, Axel. So what does it mean to have copyright?
Well, now you mentioned BASIC, so let me back up a second and say that we did license the BASIC from Commodore, and there was like an Easter egg buried in it. And at one point during the PET era, I believe it was Bill Gates came over to the Commodore booth. This is before my time. I heard this from Chuck Peddle. And was it Chuck? It was either Chuck or Leonard Tramiel I heard it from. And they tried to find the Easter egg. And somebody finally goes, if you're looking for the egg, we took it out. And we completely rewrote BASIC. We just had to leave the disclaimer on there, the 1977 part. But the BASIC that's in the 128 is a rewrite by the time we got to it. So, and that was Terry Ryan. By the way, Wes asked if I had an analog scope that used to be able to see it in the background here. Yeah, I had a real nice 2465 400 megahertz scope with good probes, and I gave it to my friend Terry Ryan, and it made him happy and it made me happy to do it. So that just happened like 4 months ago. Wow. So sorry, Wes, my analog scope is gone, but it's in a good home. The guy that wrote the BASIC we're looking at here today.
Oh, cool.
So,
yep. See, it all comes back around in a loop.
It does. It does. Karma's a bitch, as they say, but there's probably good karma out there. I just have to experience it someday. So what's up here is I'm working on a possible Hackaday video about the wire. And the wire only means something in Z80 mode. Well, this is only like the third time that I've even booted a 128. I booted it last week, and that's how I found out my first disk was no good. So Dean Notarnicola was great and sent me a new CPM operating disk, a new to me CPM operating disk that he tested before sending to me. So I was going to boot into CPM to even see if the Z80 runs in this. And before I do, I'll tell you that we didn't set out to have a Z80 in the Commodore 128. It was a reaction to several problems. One was the CPM cartridge worked like donkey poo. It was just horrible. It needed an 1.5 amp of power supply. And this is a switching supply here that you can see. This thing would shut down if you pulled an extra 1.5 amp. It would not just get less voltage and hotter like the Commodore 64.
Okay, right. It had protection.
So that means I would have had to pay for an 1.5 amp only to be used for the CPM cartridge, or I could put a Z80 on the main motherboard and use 150 milliamps just because I get to reuse every other component. And we did that and didn't tell management that we had put the Z80 on till the PC boards arrived with the Z80 already in it. And when we went to stuff them,
go
ahead.
Massive motherboard decision, really based around power budget primarily.
Power budget, and then it turns out to have saved my life. It threw itself in front of an on-rushing bus, or the equivalent of, when we tried oh, here, I got it. This is my original Commodore Magic Voice Disc. As a matter of fact, you see it, engineering sample, return to herd, it says on there.
Huh.
This is the one we plugged into the 128 35 years ago, and it didn't work. And when I looked at it, they had taken 2 control lines that are normally soldered to ground or left floating, and were dynamically driving them. Why? The C128 didn't know anything about that. And this is, you and me talked about it. So we booted the Z80 first. It boots to a different location this cartridge knows nothing about. And it'd go, is that cartridge out there? Oh, that cartridge is out there. Let's set up in 64 mode and then let the cartridge run. So it was like, we used the Z80 was the only way we could boot our own cartridge, as it turns out. So at that time, they can't tell me to remove the Z80. It's now the processor that first boots when the thing turns on. So that's the history of the genesis of how the Z80 kind of got it to be in there. We needed it for power supply, but then it became an important architectural thing. And again, we didn't tell the bosses till it was too late. And we just said, we're now a dual processor system. Only 6 of us knew that we had designed the Z80 in. Then when we went to stuff the board, we didn't even have any Z80s. We had to go around turn open Timex Sinclairs to get the Z80s out of them. And they were socketed so we could take the Z80s out. So some of the background there.
Did Commodore ever run into supply problems with chips or parts like that? We
made most of our own parts. We always had supply problems with DRAMs in the 80s. And so we started trying to make our own. LS parts got scarce for a while and then came back. That was during the portable game thing. And before CMOS, we were using LS in battery-powered things. So you can imagine how good the battery power. Yeah, it wasn't very good at all, right?
Yeah. So for those watching, Bill's talking about different, and we've talked about this in other episodes. So go back and watch previous
different
ones,
families.
like last week.
Right.
We're talking about different standard logic families, which have the different signaling, thresholds. They have different input thresholds for logic 1 and logic 0, and output drive currents and strengths, but they are fundamentally different inside CMOS.
Right.
It's complementary MOS, but they switch slow, but they use a lot less power, and so on. So, yeah.
Right. Now, we had an agreement with Zilog anyways because we were using the Z8000. Before we got to the 68,000, we were trying to make a Z8000 machine, and so we had a thing with Zilog. So when I built the Z80 in, I wasn't worried that I'd be able to get them in the future. I just didn't have any the day the board arrived. It's like, duh, it's like an oversight on my part. So anyways, I've got my disc here from Dean, and I'm going to try it. I haven't tried this. This is going to be a first.
Pants here.
We are. And so what happened when I tried my 35? Go ahead.
No, I was going to ask, is that a CPM operating system disc?
That is a CPM operating system disk, and I'm going to boot into it. There's a load command. Honestly, I don't remember how to load the. Probably says on here, but I'm going to insert it, and I'm going to just reboot the C128. I'm going to plug in the disk drive. I kept it unplugged because I don't want it to run out of power. Or I don't want it to break. It's so freaking old, I mean. So the best way to store old stuff is never turn it on.
Now, why is that too? Because if power consumption on standby is not a concern, which it normally is, but let's just assume it isn't. So my dad used to go on and on about the taxis in Australia that they always leave their engines running, and they were all fueled by LPG, liquefied petroleum gas.
Wow! It worked!
Wow.
It's running CPM.
And you're on your A disk.
Yeah. I only remember CPM commands. Hey, I do remember a CPM command.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. So I'm closer to doing my Hackaday thing.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's amazing.
First time in 35 years, folks, that I've seen the CPM prompt on my own machine.
That is cool.
Wow, now I'm out of stuff to talk about. But so the plan is to, now that it's running, the Z80 is running 90% of the time. It still stops and lets the 6502 have a byte every now and then. But this is a second processor in a 1980s machine running, and the goal I want to show is I'm going to pull out my good scope, my, what is it? My MDO 3104, and I'm going to hook it up to the line that the wire is on and see if I can see that ghost that we troubleshot for 35 years ago.
So you had and I got the hand solder on how many million boards?
But it depends who you ask. I use 6.8 million as the total number of all sold. It could be less than that, but it's millions anyway. And the wire cost a penny, and it probably cost 99 cents to do the hand soldering. Yeah. But there was, if we changed the board, so the reason why there's a wire on the board is there was a reflection, but only when this processor was using it, the Z80. 6502 at the end of the transmission line, it'd work fine, but the Z80 was in the middle of the transmission line, you'd get reflections. So I put a wire on the board that kept it from reflecting. So and I forgot kind of where I was going with that story. I've said it so many times. But so what I want to do though is actually, and I got the idea from the Discord channel where people have been showing their scopes. I'm like, if I lift that wire, will I see the reflection come back? The 35-year-old reflection. So it'll be interesting to see if I can pick it out, because I picked it out on an analog scope, and the way I did it was by staring at the scope and then looking up at a white wall, and the reverse image in my retina burn, I could see the glitch. And I'm pointing at the glitch at the wall, and they're going, "Heard you're nuts." And I'm like, come here, stare at the screen. They stared into the, Tektronix 465. And then one guy goes, "Bill, you're still nuts." And the other guy goes, "I see it too. I see it." And he's pointing at the wall, So maybe the new scope will let me see something plainly that I never saw plainly. I just knew it was there.
Didn't have storage scopes back then.
We had a Tektronix 466, but it was about good for having your reset line stored. I mean, it was horrible. You barely saw the trace at all.
Phosphor scopes, right?
Phosphor storage scope, and it was so noisy, and the bandwidth on it was like 100 meg or something. It was just sucked. So no, we didn't have a way to store it and see it. So I had to look for something that was only there during the Z80 time and not the 6502 is how I troubleshot it. So look at that, it's freaking running. That's pretty cool.
It's awesome. Everyone's chuffed.
I wish I remember
the chat. Excuse me. Chris is asking, will it do 80 columns?
It will. I can make it do that. I don't have the 80 column cord hooked up, but absolutely, we actually ran it in 80 columns, and we would run WordStar, so we would actually edit on our own computer. So, somebody just said hi, hello. So,
hey,
wow.
Patrick.
Now, the mode I want to use on my scope is there's the ability to capture runts on the Tektronix scope. So I want to see if that can capture my ghost, or if I just have to do it. But basically, you get a color spectrogram of all the time, the number of times the trace traces over itself. It becomes a heat map. And the brighter it'll get. Well, you can weight that map so the most insignificant thing is brighter than it would normally be, the most insignificant in time. So that's what I'm going to try and pick out then.
That was the original intent of phosphoscopes, right? And digital phosphoscopes emulate the actual phosphor just using color mapping in software. And that's what you see when you're looking at a modern eye diagram, and it changes the color based on how frequently the waveform goes through that location.
That's right.
Yeah. So
and you don't want those little wispy things crossing where they're not supposed to be.
Yeah.
Arbitrary events if you're doing an eye diagram. So, all right. Well, I don't have anything more to talk about on this until next time, other than it booted. I was going to do this off camera, and I thought, hey, I might as well share it with y'all.
Oh no,
Dean,
that's great.
thank you very much for the disc. So
Yeah.
very cool.
Yeah. Next step. Do you know of any? I'm sure there's plenty of these projects out there. Probably a handful of them on Hackaday and Tindy. But the Commodore disk drive with a compact flash or SD card as an emulator for disks.
Somebody sent me one, and I have lost who it was, I'm fortunate to say. But here's a Commodore
exactly
serial cable.
Yeah.
Yep. And there's some kind of GPIO and nice little FPGA. Is that an FPGA? I assume it is. It may just, and a big flash device.
Yeah, it's like a original full-size SD card.
Right. So people asked, well, Bill, why didn't you just take an image off the internet rather than ask for, because what I did is I trolled around to see who could send me this disk. And I'm like, because I'm not even set up to use this. I'm not set up to download those images and burn them to flash that would have been readable by this. So I had, in the interest of just doing a quick Hackaday video, I needed the disk to work. So, also a shout out to 8-Bit Classics. I had to buy a cable after I stepped on my last one, my DIN cable. So 8-Bit Classics is still making Commodore cables. They make Atari cables well also. And they're at 8bitclassics.com. Yeah.
I was going to say, you've got all the parts necessary to actually, run a
bulletin board, or
you could duplicate all your titles now, because you've still got a working drive. Not a lot of people have a working drive left.
Yeah, and you need 2 drives actually to copy things. But so
yeah.
Actually, I have another drive here, but I don't know if it works. But here's a piece of history. Somebody just asked if I use Altium, and yes, I use Altium, and Ben is formerly from Altium. And this channel actually started as kind of an Altium super user group originally. Here is a drive sample. So this has never been through regular production. This is one, oh, there it is. This is one for FCC testing.
Okay.
So this is one of the ones. Measured. Right. This is one of the ones to go be measured. And that's how it ended up. By the way, I got this legally. There are some people selling Commodore stuff that they stole from Commodore out there. Mine was given to me by a vice president, and I had the proof back then that I'm allowed to have it. I signed it out as junk, as he called it. So that's a legal one. Consequently, I only have a few things that fit in one box, Yeah. So, well, very cool. So last time, I don't know if we're done talking about Commodore or not, but we talked about FPGA boards for people that want to get into FPGAs. And I couldn't find this last time. This is from Terasic DE10 Nano.
Right.
This thing costs
I have an board from them. It's
like a DE0 probably.
Well, I have the Altera Cyclone 3 starter kit board that was officially an Altera product, but it was designed by Terasic. Yeah.
I'm going to let my camera white balance. Give me a second.
Okay.
It's not doing it. I'll have to turn off that white balance.
To me.
Yeah, it really changed its chroma saturation when I held up the box. But what's on these things is you have, this is like $100. It's got a Cyclone 4 on it, which is a very usable. Is this a Cyclone 4 or a Cyclone 5?
5 has just been released recently, I think.
Yeah, this is probably a 4. But it's got DDR3 RAM, it's got push buttons, it's got switches, it's got HDMI output, which is very cool because you can write directly to the screen, and nothing is more satisfying for me than seeing my output on a screen, just like on the computer we did here today. So almost all my projects, had an output you could see and go, and enjoy.
So when did you get this? Did it just arrive this week, or?
I've had this about a year or so, but because we were talking about it, I pulled it out. Whoops. And I want to show what the predecessor was now that we're talking about it.
Have you done any projects on it yet?
Yeah, I tend to, when I start a project before I've done the board, if I have any questions about fit or pinout or things like that, I might go to a board like this and actually do my first compiles just to get a sanity check out of something like this. So I use these things not just to play with them. Here's an older one, and what we had to do back then, these are actually DVI connectors.
Yeah.
You had to put a whole separate board with a DVI transmitter and receiver. This is a DE0.
Yeah, that looks much more like the one that I have, which had a Cyclone 3. That's actually
this has a Cyclone 2 on it. Yeah.
The exact one. So, yeah, so it has this high-speed connector on one side.
It does. Right. Little mezzanine connector.
Yeah. Those connectors are really interesting.
They're engineered. They are. They're cool. Yeah, I'd love to know more about the mechanics of how high-speed connectors are made. You and I belong to that SI list.
Yep. And
the connector companies are heavily represented there because you almost always have to send the signal somewhere.
And the connectors are usually the worst culprits as far as reflections.
Right. And we actually saw that last week when we had it on the TDR.
Yeah.
So I'm just checking the OLEG FPGA dev board.
FPGA dev board, yeah. Yeah.
Right. So if you want to get into FPGAs, I recommend again from last week Terasic, and I recommend the DE10 Nano board as being a cheap alternative or a cheap thing to use. And now that I'm holding it, I want to do something with it again, right? It's like, oh, I could hook that up and write some simple code.
Good. You could do it here and now.
Oh, wouldn't that be fun? You guys watch me curse at my Altera software and you get the plugs all happening. And
do you have the right laptop there? Is that?
Well, that's what I actually, it's funny you say that. I have a laptop set up. It's an older one, but it's set up with all my Altera stuff. So I literally would go over there, grab the laptop and hook it up rather than put it on one of my day-to-day computers.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just because the development environment's so,
yeah.
So picky. So somebody said something about a Cyclone 5. Oh, somebody just had a Cyclone 5 board made at JLPCB, which I'm a big user of JLPCB. I was using PCBWay, but their prices have done something funny lately, and so I've been on JLPCB.
Yeah.
Interface.
I've used them. I really am a big fan of OshPark if I need something quick though, and I want 4 layers.
Right, and now 6 layers, as we did last week. OshPark has 6-layer boards.
Yeah, Bill, we should actually do a board. We should design a Coriolis
effect.
Maybe that's what I could call mine. I've been working on an FPGA board. It's not really an FPGA, more like a CPLD board. That's it's a Lattice Mark X02 because they're very affordable, instant on. They're really incredible devices too. So you're not going to do digital signal processing, but if you want to do glue logic, memory sharing, DMA, like if you want to build a whole system and have one chip take care of all the housekeeping, that's what you want a Lattice Mark XO for, because they're really fast. So for example,
they don't need to be programmed. They're already,
Yeah, it's instant on, and so for example, I'm putting SD-RAM. An SD-RAM controller will be in it. They could do DDR as well, but I'm just sticking with SD-RAM because I don't need it to be super fast. LCD on one side of the board, and probably basic I/O. And so the idea is it'll take care of all the memory mapping and memory control and double buffering for the LC display. And then I can have any kind of basic host microcontroller just send it commands and sort of on boot, send it a bunch of bitmaps and sprites. It stores them in SRAM. And then it's from there, it's all just commands. Put this there, put that there. And
do you want to explain double buffering?
Double buffering, yeah. It's like, well, actually, let me see if I can. I wonder if I can do this in.
So while you're doing that, Wes mentioned that JLPCB has SMD assembly. So is a lot of houses like PCBWay. The trick with using overseas SMD assembly is you still want to know that you got it right yourself first, because if you have them make it, you're missing that vital communication step. We used to actually go and sit in the SMD house to, Skype just did something weird. But I can still see you.
I'm just sharing my screen.
Here, I'll pull that up then. But be prepared to do rework if you did your first build using an SMD assembly house, unless you're in a tight communication with them that says, no, I specified the wrong part, let me get that right part for you and stuff. So we used to be there available to answer questions in real time, the first build. After you build it once, it usually gets a little better.
Can you see my paint here?
I can see your paint, so let me add it to the flow here. Oop, my microphone came off. Give me a second.
Oh, Adrian's saying he made a 6502 single step with the Altera CPLD. And
yes,
the Altera CPLDs are obsolete, but that's okay. You could port your code and design to something like a Lattice pretty easily, or a newer. I'm guessing you were using a Max 2 or something. You could migrate.
I love Max 2s.
You could migrate that to an Altera Max 10 or something current, and it would probably work 20 times faster as well. Yeah.
So let me see, Skype shared screen, doink. Hey, there's your shared screen. Okay.
Cool. So I can actually use...
let me get rid of the echo, and echo's gone. Okay.
Well, let's go with the thicker size. So let's see. So double buffering.
So I would ask Adrian if he wrote his own 6502, or if he downloaded one. Like I go to opencores.org. And I get my 6502 cores there when I want one. They've got like 8 or 9 tested ones. And I'll pick them whether I want cycle accurate or whether I want something that can go as fast as possible. Those are the two choices I'll make when picking out a core. And I tend to work in Verilog. I can read VHDL, but I have to sit and scratch my head for 3 days to write my first line of meaningful code in VHDL. You have to do all your declarations and stuff. Are you doing that with a pen, or are you doing that with your mouse?
It's with the stylus.
Okay, because I was going to say, I can't write that good with a mouse.
No one can. So here...
Yeah, I got one of those, just not plugged in right now.
Yep. So it's a TFT. So it's your display. So the concept of double buffering is you have, and this can all be done under software control and normally is in a application sort of like with regular desktop computers or whatever. But in embedded systems, it could also be done with hardware. So that's why you want something like an FPGA. But the concept is you have these multiplexers. You have your host CPU, and you have your peripheral TFT output. But you don't want the display to flicker. And if you're busy writing to memory locations, you have display memory. So this is your bitmap that's getting displayed. It's getting written to by the host CPU to change the display, to animate or whatever, but it's getting read by the display. And while the display is reading a given line in your memory array for the display buffer, if you're writing stuff and changing that, it holds up the display output. So at the very worst, it causes flickering or loss of synchronization, or at best, it can make the display messy because you're actually changing the memory content of some lines as they're being written out. So double buffer is where you actually duplicate, you use twice as much memory as you need for one display, and then just figuratively, we're selecting A, not B on the multiplexers. Of course, it's a little more complex than this in reality, but the display gets to choose. It's busy reading out of this one while the CPU can only write into this one. And then they switch over. And if the CPU tries to get access to one of these buffers while the display is reading from it, it gets a wait. So you can't overwrite. But generally it speeds up the whole system because you can still write to the buffer that's not currently being displayed. So it's just a way of preventing display flickering and things like that, and to make smooth animations. And all of this kind of stuff. So my board has what I'm designing has an ESP32 as the host. You can do a lot with an ESP32.
You can do a lot with an ESP32.
It has a lattice mark.
I like the feather line of ESP32s, or they call them feathers, the shields that go on them. But when I need a quick processor, I grab an ESP32 from Adafruit, actually.
Yep. We've got SDRAM, so it has a SDRAM controller in softcore. So they have IP that, and there's some hardware dedicated on these devices specifically for SDRAM and DDR as well. So it makes it easier and very efficient on using the space inside the Mark XO to do that. So, and then I have my TFT panel hanging off of that as well.
All right.
And then a handful of other IOs just for general purpose, whatever I want to do with it. But the idea is to build this whole scheme, gets built into the hardware in here, along with a DDR controller that takes care of configuring this device on power up, and then it makes it so the ESP32 could essentially do high-speed quad SPI or something like that. Some kind of, it's got its own code memory, and it's got its own local memory,
right?
But for display purposes, I want to be able to boot up, write a bunch of bitmaps into this and reference those and use DMA, a form of DMA and double buffering. So apart from initialization, all the ESP32 has to do is issue commands to say, place this sprite here. And that's exactly how things were done with games back in
the days of true sprites.
Exactly. That's how C64 did it. And the reason
we did it best.
The reason those
we
games
had the best sprites,
had the best graphics for that time, was that the CPU wasn't doing all the heavy lifting. You would preload all the graphics off your floppy disk or tape into memory, and then the software for the game would just reference those things using indirect addressing.
Right.
and write them to the display buffer, and so you could get really fast animation. Of course, nothing compared to what you do with a GPU today. But if I want a little embedded systems display that can be applied to a lot of different products, that all it has to do is two-dimensional. All it has to do is basic user interface stuff with some nice animation. And if I wanted to do more than that, I'd probably upgrade the whole design to something more like an Altera Cyclone, because then I've got some DSP capability inside the chip. The FPGA will have multipliers and accumulators that will allow additional things to be done, like the math,
collision detection, things like that,
and math for rotating things in a 3D object projected onto
overlay,
a
which one's in front of the other one, that type of thing.
Alpha blending for transparency is another one. But for a generally useful, nice embedded system, of course, I could just do the whole thing with a Raspberry Pi or an Android.
Right.
And
it's almost not fair these days. Yeah.
I know. It's become too easy.
Speaking of CLPDs, I wanted to show this real quick. This is a 40-pin pinout where I put a 6502. The chip's missing, but this was a Max 2 CPLD 6502, and I could have made a 6502 out of that, and wanted to do 6532s and 6522s with this. I was pushing the CPLD, and again, the CPLD part meant it did not need a flash RAM sitting next with it. The CPLD was programmed once.
Yeah,
so
I love that.
Actually, I love the Max series. Sprites, we were not actually allowed to use the word Sprite. It belonged to Texas Instruments.
Really?
Even though, even they had trademarked it, even though it's in the Tempest or whatever Shakespeare's play is, right? So we had to call them movable object blocks, MOBs.
That's so stupid.
But we called them sprites.
You shouldn't be allowed to trademark a word.
Well, they trademarked .zip. Somebody literally trademarked a suffix. .arc, that was trademarked, in the old DOS days. You couldn't have a file called .zip unless you were the owners of the trademark. And that was ridiculous.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah. So now in Atari did not have even the 2600. They had in the antique ANTIC, the chipset, they only had a pair of player missiles. So they had one player, two players, and two missiles the players could shoot. So when they wanted more than 4 things on the screen, they had to multiplex them. And so what you'd see on the old Atari games is the more things on the screen, the more they'd flicker, because they're trying to rewrite them all the time. And they make the phone booth and Lois Lane be the same object in Superman, and they would flicker real nasty.
That sounds like, again, using the persistence of vision of old TVs and monitors.
That's it. In your eyes a little bit, yeah.
But those kinds of things I can't tolerate. They just give me a headache really bad. It's like sitting next to a noisy DC to DC converter, that's whining just up around, like TVs used to, up around 15k hertz. It would just drive me mad. I just want to would you please just take a big vat of epoxy and dip the whole thing in it?
I saw that the guy who started Texas Roadhouse restaurants just committed suicide.
Oh.
He got COVID, and then after COVID, he had tinnitus. And the constant tinnitus, presumably, is one of the things that led him to commit suicide. And I just read about that in the last week.
That's horrible.
So can you imagine hearing a tone all the time in your head? That would drive me nuts.
Well, my mum suffered with tinnitus, but she wears earbuds with a little quiet pink noise generator, and that pink noise, just a low-level pink noise in the background, actually eases it.
So tell us what pink noise is versus white noise.
Oh, pink noise is low to high mids in the frequency spectrum of audio.
It's not all frequencies. It's some portion of the band. It's colored, right? As we say.
Yes. Whereas white noise is presumably it's like white light. You get equal amplitude in the
20
spectrum.
hertz and 20 kilohertz. Yeah.
Right. Right.
So it's probably got the lower frequencies, as you said. So it's not the high frequency that the tinnitus presents. Yeah.
Yeah, and my noise together with it probably balances out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My pilot instructor used to fly crop dusters in open crop dusters. He had tinnitus real bad from the engine noise, constant engine noise.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Of the old days.
I can hardly tolerate flying in prop-driven aircraft. I've flown in those puddle jumpers a few times, say between LA and San Diego, and every single time, even with ear covering, noise cancelling headphones on, I would get off with a headache.
Yeah.
I'd always be asking to sit in front of the props, and they'd almost always be right next to them or behind them.
Right.
And it's just like I can't tolerate this. That sound is just, even with all the soundproofing and everything they try to do to mitigate it, it's just awful.
Well, who is it from the Who? Now, if he does do a performance, he basically has a soundproof booth on stage due to his hearing loss. Or am I thinking of the bass player who's now deceased? Somebody from the Who, messed his hearing up with good old rock and roll.
Yeah.
So has rock and roll affected your hearing any?
I've always been pretty careful. There were some early days mainly during rehearsals where it got too loud in the room, but concerts, most concerts I go to, I have high fidelity earplugs that cut the sound level, but they cut it equally across all bands, so you still hear clarity. And then when I'm playing myself, I'm always using in-ear monitors, and there's no stage sound, pretty much zero stage sound. Sometimes singers like fold back and some ambient noise, but the sound guys try to keep it to a minimum because all of the rest of us are wearing in-ear monitors, and we have our own mix, and we can keep it under that sort of dangerous level.
Has that replaced the stage monitor then?
For all,
or do they still run stage? Or do they still have them in case as a backup?
They're there as a backup, but generally don't get used, and depends on the venue too. Some venues, like if you're playing in an old bar, and it's a tiny little stage, and you're just playing rock and roll in a bar,
right? You throw a stage monitor or something.
They predominantly still do it the old way, acoustically, and you've got to be really careful. But I don't play in those places.
Right.
I'm always using in-ear monitors.
Now, so I'm from the days before we had earbuds like that, and and we played a lot of dive bars, but I had a set of lights that I could light up a whole amphitheater with, Shell, or I had a stripped down version. I could go into a bar. I literally had two stands, one on each side of the bar, whatever they called a stage. Sometimes it was just some beer boxes, right?
Yeah.
But I could come in with like a total of like 14 lights on two stands, and they were literally welded to wheels. The wheel hub of a car was my stand.
And that's nice and heavy to keep them stable.
Nice and heavy. You wheel it in, and you start clamping your lights to it. Yeah.
I like it. That's cool.
So, hey, guess what time it is?
How did it get past the hour already? There was one other thing I wanted to.
Go for it.
About.
We got to mention Good Friday too.
Yeah. So is that next week or the week after?
It's April 2nd, and that might be next week.
So Good Friday, we're not going to stream. That's basically a family day for me. So we will miss you all, but we'll get right back to it the week after. And I was hoping to talk about decision feedback equalization, but maybe we save that for another show.
We could do a whole show on equalization and what that means, and I'd love to combine that with an eye diagram.
Well, actually, since you've got the TDR there too, maybe we could pre-configure it with some cable runs or something as well. I don't know. We'll think about it.
I thought about that since we talked about the pulsar. By the way, Leo Bodner, I pointed him at our thing. I said, hey, we showed your pulsar, and he sent back, nice show. So nice show from Leo. But I was actually going to hook one of these up and make a manual TDR just to see what performance. But I wanted to play with my CPM box.
Yeah. No, that was cool, man. That was a treat, Bill, seeing the 128 fired up.
Well, I'm one step closer to making a Hackaday video now too, out of that.
Yeah.
So
it's good, and you've got the 128, the black 128 PCBs. So
yes.
I wonder if I know it's probably.
Yeah, I can't get to it right now without bumping a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, more time than you have, but I would love to see those
a TDR on that
brought to life, or at least the TDR on that trace.
I'm going to do a TDR on it. Yeah.
So yeah, cool, man.
All right, my friend. I am out of things to talk about, given that it is now almost 5 minutes out. Anything else you'd add other than, as we said, we won't be here next week, but we'll be here the week after.
Just really quick, I did want to show. So some weeks ago, I'll stop sharing that screen really quick.
Hey, that worked out well. That paint scene that you did there.
I'll do that again. I'm just firing up Fusion because some weeks ago when we're getting started, I was showing the first project I walked myself through from start to finish, and I did promise everyone. I was going to show the final product, and I can't quite demo it today. I have played through it. It does work. But I have a bit of a noise issue, and I'm not sure if it's the 9-volt adapter that I was powering it from. So I'm gonna.
You could try a battery just to rule it out.
I'm gonna try a battery, but I haven't soldered the battery snap terminals on quite yet.
Right.
So hopefully
batteries are wonderful for audio. I have no problem using batteries.
Yeah, they're nice and quiet. You know, the power supply is not your source of noise, but where is Fusion? Where'd it go?
With that said, I had somebody try and power a 4 to 20 milliamp transmitter off 9 volts, and I looked up the battery, and it's only capable of like 10 milliamps. So that's the only thing is they've got a high series resistance.
They do.
And
they do. So anyway, while I'm waiting for that to come up, so this is the final. I haven't put knobs on it yet. So cool. That's the final. Pedal. So
I heard the metal lid, nice and shielded, nice. That's a stomp box there, right? I mean, you can stomp it and not hurt it.
Yeah. So I ended up doing it as a multi-board design because I could, and actually it meant that I can make a generic I/O and power block, which I can use in any pedal design. So these are my Ospark After Dark PCBs in here. So I've got all of that just linked through some cables and shielded cables to the main board. The effect is here. It's a purely discrete circuit. This fuzz is sort of based on a 60s circuit that used germanium diodes.
Germanium diodes for the that's cool.
And for the octave up. So it's actually the second stage. You see those two transistors there by my middle finger. That's a big gain stage and then a phase inverter stage. Just use one BJT, and you take a signal off the top, which is inverted, and the signal off the bottom, which is in emitter follower mode, and then you pass those through a diode, and you sum that together, and you get a sort of full wave rectified version of your signal.
Okay.
So that adds the octave harmonics into it, and it's really dirty and nasty sounding and awesome.
Cool. But somebody said you could put 9-volt batteries in parallel. I'd actually say not necessarily, because one battery could be doing 9.1 volt and the other one 8.9, and that's 0.2 volts shorting into each other. So you can because they have high series resistance, but you got to be conscious when you put two voltages together.
Yeah, they've got to both be fresh from the same batch, so they're exactly the same age, and then
same charged. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, well, that looked very cool, my friend.
Yeah.
Where'd you come with? Is the purple something you did, or did you buy that in a purple case?
Actually, that's something I love about these Hammond boxes is you can buy them pre-painted.
Oh, is that a Hammond? I love Hammond.
Yeah, they're awesome.
Yeah.
These maybe a Hammond knockoff from China, but I normally buy genuine Hammonds because they're dimensionally exact. Whereas the knockoffs sometimes are a little bigger or a little smaller and don't precisely match. And if I'm machining the top, they have to be the exact height. And
somebody mentioned you could use these cells in parallel. Yes, you can get away with things in parallel, but it's like LEDs. If you put LEDs in parallel, you need to have a resistor or something in series with each LED because the forward voltage drops are slightly different and one will steal current from another. So you can't put two LEDs exactly in parallel and expect each to draw LEDs, 10 mils.
Any emitter, any PN junction.
Yes.
You can put them in parallel, but they won't share current equally. So that's why in class A and AB and even class C amplifiers and class B, when you have BJT output stages, but you need more power, you put them in parallel, but you have to put resistors, even a 0.1 ohm.
0.1 ohm, you got it.
Resistors on the emitters so they share the current more equally. Yeah.
Right. So that different voltage will drop across the resistor, that 0.1 volt difference or something. So it like allows it to be mushy is the way I kind of picture it. So.
Yeah.
It's not a hard BJT junction.
Yep.
So, wow, cool. Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to hearing that thing. And do you also get the fuzz from that big gain stage you're talking about? Do you overdrive it?
Oh yeah, that first stage.
So it's clipped. It's square waves.
It's very much gain, and then the following stage with tone also has additional hard clipping diodes.
Okay.
So it's really dirty, but so you wouldn't like just play a whole song through it. It's an effect you apply.
It's an effect, right?
You apply it during a particular part of a solo or a riff, and then you wouldn't.
You know what we were always making in the old days is we were always trying to make mouth organs. Where you had a speaker with a hose, and you try to make a good interface between the hose and the speaker, so you can put it in your mouth and do the Peter Frampton sound.
The talk box.
Digitech
made those for a long time, and I don't think they make them anymore, but you can still get them. There's a lot of them in the market, and not many people use them. But I was just listening to Neil Morse. I'm a huge Neil Morse fan. So Neil Morse is a progressive rock artist from Nashville. You should check him out. He uses the talk box. So yeah, it's a tiny speaker in a box. So your main signal goes through, but it also goes into this little speaker inside a box, and there's a hose attached to it. And that goes up the mic stand and you stick the hose in the side of your mouth, and then you have a microphone. So you're using your own formants and head resonances to make.
That's right.
To make sounds.
It's a filter. You're using your head as a filter. Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's very unique sound, and not many people do it now. But I thought I might actually get into that myself a little bit.
And you can do it with your synthesizer these days and stuff. Just you punch up a sound source instead of an oscillator. You can run a microphone through your synthesizer through the filters there and everything. That's where they get the Cylon effect, the vocoder. Yeah. We could do a thing on vocoders at some point. That'd be cool.
Yep.
So, excellent.
Well,
let me make the screen smaller here again.
I was going to say, you still got me full screen somehow.
I forget, and I leave those up. So
I'm not the star here. You are.
It's a show. It's a combination. So, whoops, I lost my CPM screen. There it is.
Just something else to put a pin in for next time as well. We've got some instruments coming. I know Mike Fikes had ordered and had finally received this week an LCR bridge, which I was very excited to see. And if anyone is joining us live here but doesn't doesn't know, we'll just say it again. Join our Discord, because the discussions go on all week. It's not just here, and the whole, all the viewers.
It's a lot of discussion. Yeah.
Everyone gets on, and we're sharing video and photos of gear that we're, instruments and things we're playing with, and circuits we're messing with. So Mike had a really cool LCR bridge, one of those DE5000s, and I've got one of them on order as well. They're amazing, so I'm looking forward to getting that. So we'll do a bit of work with that. I invested in that to be able to design custom wound inductors and transformers for switching power supplies. So, and I have some inductors and things I've wound before. So it'll be a cool thing to fool around with that a bit on the show. What do you reckon?
All right. I just stuck the Discord invite into the YouTube live chat, so hopefully that works. I grabbed it from Coriolis-effect.com.
Yep.
And I'm not going to spell it today. So
thanks, Phil.
All right. Hey, it was good seeing you, my friend. You have a good holiday coming up next weekend.
Yep.
Enjoy the family time, and we will see you in 2 weeks.
Okay. Hey, good to see you, Bill. Good to see you, everyone. We'll chat with you online at least, but we'll stay connected by